Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm here to do a quick AM reading update for the week of April 2nd through 8th, 2018. As usual, I'm not exactly where I'd like to be at this point in the week. I was hoping to be finished with this book, but instead I'm only about halfway through. This is Surprised by God, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Religion by Danya Ruttenberg, a title that I continue to stumble on. I feel like I want to say a love in there before it comes in. But anyway, this is a memoir about a woman, a rabbi, and her return basically to Judaism. And I've read a handful of memoirs about Jewish people and their relationships to Judaism. But this one undoubtedly is the one that reminds me the most of myself and my own journey, because Danya Ruttenberg grew up a lot the way that I did, only maybe about 10 or so years earlier than I did. She grew up in a family that was largely assimilated, not too observant. The only major difference, I suppose, is that her family wasn't interfaith the way mine is. And around the same age, we both sort of said screw it to religion and tried to walk away and not look back. And then later in life, we returned basically to a Jewish practice in an egalitarian, progressive strain, not the orthodox strain of Judaism. And yet I somehow feel a little bit distant from this book, and I'm not sure if it's a failing on my part because Ruttenberg is asking deep, complex questions, and maybe I should be giving everything a little bit more time, or maybe I am giving it time because this is a relatively short book and it's taking me a while to read it, I think. But she actually does come to Judaism differently than I do. I mean, a lot of it is even in the title, something that she's looking for in her practice. What she connected to was the idea of God. And I don't know, I have a less fraught, perhaps, but also less examined relationship with God in Judaism. I suppose when I returned to Judaism, as I said, the connection that I felt was a connection to the people. And I'm sort of ambivalent about God. I am not an atheist. I never have been. I just feel differently about what God means at different points, particularly on the calendar. Like in particular, the two gods I believe in are the Rosh Hashanah and High Holidays God and the Passover God. The High Holidays God is a very personal God, demanding self-reflection and about what needs improvement in my life, and the Passover God is community-oriented and says that you belong to something bigger than yourself. So that, in a nutshell, generally is how I believe in God, and it even feels weird to say it like that because it still feels a bit old man in the sky-y to me, but like Ruttenberg, that's not ultimately how I believe in God. She believes in God very much the way I do, I think, in that it's transcendent force about change and about connection to like the universe as it was. And Ruttenberg herself was a philosophy student and a religious studies academic student, and she doesn't have much difficulty in confronting the idea that, you know, the Torah is not written by God. It probably has a few different authors. But she still feels this pull, and this novel, this memoir, is about her pull to turning back to God. And she talks about how she was looking for this sort of transcendent experience ever since she was a teenager, and she used to find it in this hybrid, I guess, when she was a teenager between like she was a partier and she got into the music scene that was the popular music of the 80s and the 90s, and she'd go out to these clubs and dancing with friends at night, but she was also very involved in community action, social justice activities. Like she and her friends organized a music band event that the proceeds went to help a battered women's shelter, and she did volunteering at abortions clinics and that sort of thing. And then later, perhaps aided in part by a trip with her father to Poland, where they visited the sites of the Holocaust, and also by her mother's death and coming to terms with what it means to lose a parent that way, she slowly started to accept the idea of something spiritual, something more in line with a godhead than an atheist mindset into her life. And I mean, this book is about her talking about ultimately how she returns to religion. And I guess she always, even in her studies academically, had a little bit of an open mind to what it means to be religious. Anyway, right now in the middle of the book, we're in a period where she is struggling with the idea of becoming more observant, like in keeping the laws of kashrut, of keeping the Sabbath, and I guess I am struggling a little bit. I'm a little confused about why it is that she feels the need to adhere to these rituals if she doesn't believe in, you know, the old man on the hill telling her what to do. And I guess it really, I would assume it really is in line with why I struggle with this and why I feel like I should be more traditionally religious in these ways, because it's not so much about an old man on a hill, but it's about if you feel this connection to these people, then you should walk the walk, as it were, of that connection. Anyway, I feel like maybe I'm letting way too much of my own bias in about my own experiences and return to Judaism and conflating them with hers. And I also, I don't know, I wonder if maybe she has too many quotes from too many different people in her own narrative, and that's part of what makes it a non-traditional memoir. I mean, not that any memoir, I guess, is traditional, but I think these quotes, they can add things, but they're also sort of esoteric to a certain degree, that maybe it takes a mindset that I'm not used to. I'm not sure if I need to challenge myself more, or if maybe it's a little too disconcerting of a memoir. But I am really enjoying this, and I've already talked about it in this video a lot longer than I thought I would. So here's another book I could probably go on and on about, I think, if I give myself the option. This is Shelter by Jung Yun. It is a novel that I picked up because it won the 2016 Reading Women's Award by the Reading Women podcast that's put out by Cantor Winchester, who is a booktuber, and then her friend Autumn Privet. And every year since 2016, they've picked a winner of their favorite published works written by a woman I believe in English, in fiction and nonfiction, and this was their fiction piece. And I talked last week about how I actually picked this book up from the library, I think in late January, and I put it off because I had all these other books crowding in the way. And finally I decided, you know, I either have to pick this up now or return it to the library ASAP, because, you know, I've run out of holds. And man, oh man, it's one of my favorite books of the year now. So what do you know? I think this book was amazing. I loved it. It is a story chronicling a family. The Cho's, they're a Korean family. The point of view character is Kyung, who was born in Korea, but his family immigrated to America when he was 4, when his father got a professorial position in the States. He is a 36-year-old man who was married to an Irish-American woman, Jillian, and they have a 4-year-old son, Ethan. They are currently living in a house that they can't afford because their debts are pretty astronomical at the time of the novel, and the novel opens with them attempting to see what they could get by selling their house, if that could cover their debts, and it can't, so they're in limbo about deciding what to do to maintain some shred of financial security. And into all of this, Kyung's parents, who are well off and well-to-do, but Kyung is pretty distant from them. They don't have a very emotional relationship, and ultimately we learn that there's actually a fair bit of abuse in their backstory. But anyway, there's his parents are the victims of a brutal home invasion where these two brothers come in, burst into their home and keep them hostage and attempt to extort money from them. And they also sexually assault Kyung's mother and the family's housekeeper, Marina. And so this is a literary fiction novel, but it has a relatively fast pace. I mean, if you can take that trigger warning about the sexual assault and the violence. But it has that fast-paced sort of crime fiction underbelly that keeps the plot moving a little faster than most literary fiction. But I'd still say this is literary fiction because really the main impetus, the main crux of what the story is interested in is these family relationships, not a whodunit sort of thing. The crux of the novel is that Kyung's parents and Marina, the housekeeper, have to move in with him, and he's attempting to take care of them. But at the same time, he's sort of dealing with a lot of resentment about his past, that his parents haven't acknowledged how much they've hurt him. And I just think Yun brought out Kyung's character really well. It was just a very nuanced character, and I think in a way it was more of a struggle than usual to bring out his problems and his parents' problems, because their family drama isn't overtly dramatic because they don't talk about things. They're reserved people, and well, that's something that Kyung really struggles with, and he kind of goes the other way and becomes a dick who thinks, well, I have to be an asshole and out in the open and angry about everything, and that's the way that I can solve things. And he has this big chip on his shoulder, and it's a novel that's filled with unlikable characters. So that I know that turns some people off, but to me, pretty much everybody felt completely relatable. Like, I mean, that they felt believable at all times. And I just was fascinated by their interactions and sad for them. And I feel like this is a novel where all of the characters come off as being very three-dimensional. Like, we get into Kyung's in-laws, who are these working-class Irish Americans, versus his parents and him, who come from a professorial academic Korean immigrant background. But ultimately, this isn't an issues novel. You can see how people's socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnicities do play into who they are, but it's not all of who they are. So we get great insights into, especially into the Korean-American immigrant experience, but it is a novel that transcends that as well, and it's about these issues about how do you come to terms with who your parents were and how they hurt you, and what is the idea of shelter, to, you know, grab this low-hanging fruit of the title, because these homes that are supposed to be safe aren't really safe. Like, Kyung's home is sort of a financial debtor's prison for him, basically, that he can't really escape because he doesn't have the money. And his parents' home, which is really nice because his mother, like, made it basically into her decorator's dream, and they have money and security, but do they really? Because they're the victims of this home invasion. So what is shelter? What is security? And so there's wonderful themes and wonderful characters, and I can't wait to see what Yun comes up with next. I hope she comes up with something soon, because through researching her, I see that at the moment she lives in Baltimore, which is very close to me. So maybe if she publishes a second novel, she will do readings in local bookshops, and maybe I could go see her, which would be fun, because I really, really loved this novel, and I would love to read what she comes up with next. And another thing that I sort of started reading this week, technically, because I did read one poem on a video, is this collection of Emily Bronte's poetry. Because in America, this is National Poetry Month, so last year I decided I should try to read at least one volume of poetry a year. Admittedly, it's not a lot, but it's something. And this year I decided I really wanted to read some of Emily Bronte's poetry, because she was really known for being a fantastic poet. I haven't really gotten that far in it yet. I really only read that one poem that I read in my Cherry Blossoms video. Earlier last week I went to the Tidal Basin in Washington, D.C., and I filmed a little bit and talked about the cherry blossoms there, and so I'll link to that below. I figure I can go through this book throughout the month and maybe share in upcoming videos about where I am and what poetry speaks to me, but at the same time I think I have to go a little faster than I have this week because there are over 200 pages in this book and only so much time in the month, so hopefully I can get my act together and read, I don't know, 80, 90 pages a week. Now on to the books that I hope to read in the coming week, hopefully getting to them relatively soon. This is the book that I have to read for my book club. We are meeting on the 26th. This is The Hours Count, which I shared in my book haul. It is a historical fiction novel about Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They were American citizens, the only American citizens who were executed for espionage, that they spied for the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and they were killed in 1953. But this historical fiction novel is told somewhat slant. It's told through the perspective of a fictional neighbor who knew Ethel and as basically a normal Jewish housewife of that era. So I'm hoping that this will give some insight into what drew Jews of that period to communism and to socialism, because it was something that for a subset of Jews was appealing, that they were drawn to that in America. And there's a whole other part of this where Jews were just automatically assumed to be communists and socialists, and they were targeted much more often than they were actually part of the groups. But so this is the period that this novel will be chronicling. So I hope that it will give some insight to that period and into that cultural phenomenon, while of course at the same time being about a well-defined individual character and her issues. And finally, I'd like to read this book for the Sammy Rohr Prize. I forgot to mention that the Danya Ruttenberg memoir that I talked about at the beginning, I'm reading for the Sammy Rohr Prize. I'm trying to chronicle 3 nonfiction books that were up for contention for the 2010 prize. The Sammy Rohr Prize seeks to honor an emerging Jewish author either in fiction or nonfiction every year. And with this book, I am returning to the lesser traveled territory for me of social history. This book is called Station Identification, A Cultural History of Yiddish Radio in the United States by R.A.Y. Kelman. And I will read from the flap. This illuminating study examines the culture of Yiddish radio in the United States during radio's golden age. R.A.Y. Kelman explores the complex negotiations between an immigrant minority population and a mass medium, revealing, in the process, the dynamic relationship between audience and community. By focusing on voices previously unheard and excluded from American radio histories, this first full scholarly treatment of non-English language radio breaks new ground in the study of both American mass media and immigrant culture. Yiddish radio, located at the intersection of ethnicity and popular culture, directly addressed the everyday lives of Jewish immigrants, even as it provided them with invaluable guidance as they struggled to become American. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, as radio grew in popularity, it created a virtual place where Jewish immigrants could listen to voices that sounded like theirs, thus orally in reinforcing the sound of their community as it evolved to take new forms, particularly in the light of World War II and the years that followed. Okay, there were a lot of run-on sentences in that. But yeah, I'm excited. I am a fan of music, and I've always been very intrigued by Yiddish culture, so I hope that this will be a fun read. Again, I'm not as familiar with reading social history books, and I know the writing can be a little more dry, but yeah, the topic should hopefully sustain me. Here's to hoping. So that about covers it for me now. As usual, I'm getting to this way too late and should end this and get to bed. I have a semi-busy week coming up. I suppose I have my writing group meeting tomorrow, and I myself am having a chapter of my novella critiqued, and a dentist's appointment on Tuesday. I guess that actually is about it. So hopefully that'll give me ample enough time to read these books on the down turn. Although at the same time, more TV series that I like are starting to come out. Like this week, The Expanse is coming back to Sci-Fi, and I really am looking forward to this season, even though I feel kind of bad that I've never read the books. So yeah, hopefully a relatively easygoing week in April for me, where maybe even the weather will start to feel more like spring. I mean, hey, one can hope at least. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.